It's not in the face! Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Hey, Not the Face with your host, John Nash, and your producer, me, Steffi Haynes. And today is a very special day because we are going to give away an episode absolutely free. And the reason why is because it's an important episode. It is a response to the interview that Ariel Helwani did with Andy Foster. And if you're saying, who the heck is this Andy Foster dude? Well, Andy Foster is the chief commissioner for the California State Athletic Commission. He's the head honcho over there. So that's what we're going to base this entire show on, is that interview. And again, we're going to give it away for free because we have not given away a free episode in a long time. And we figured this would be a good one to do that with. So if you would still please subscribe to us. Paid subscription gets you all of our content that is behind a paywall. It gets you everything. This one is free, but, it's few and far between that we do free episodes. I think it's been almost 3 months since the last one we gave away. So if you want access to everything, paid subscription gets you all of that. Now, John, how the heck are you?
Good. I mean, you should be honest with the public, though. The reason we're doing this free is because we were too lazy to record. Be honest. Let's be more honest. I was too lazy to record an episode yesterday. And so we were behind the ball and we figure we have to make up for it. So we're doing the free episode. The last free one, too, though, I recommend go back. That was the interview we did with Pat English and James Quinn.
Yes.
Doubleheader. Yes. So our batting average is very high on the free one. So we expect this one to be just as it's going to be Ohtani levels.
Ohtani levels. Now, I have to correct you on something. It was both of us that decided together not to do a show yesterday because we wanted to make sure we had, a lot of content to give out to our listeners. But so much content came in that we have divvied it all up. And we figured that this chunk was very, very important. And we wanted to focus just on this. So that is why this episode is free, above the reason that John stated the laziness. No, we want to give this away for free because it's an important piece. So let's get right into it. Now, Andy Foster said that he reached out to Ariel Helwani just because he wanted to talk to him. What was the reason he gave for wanting to talk to Ariel Helwani in the first place? And why do you think he really wanted to come on the show? It seems like he had an ulterior motive.
Yeah, the reason he gave, and it probably is the reason. It might be the reason. There's no way to say that this is not the reason. But the reason he gave is he thought there was too much misconception, too much misinformation floating around about the Muhammad Ali American Boxing Revival Act, and too much hostility to it. And so he wanted to come on and address what he viewed as the misconceptions that people had. And I'm going to, I don't want to poke fun at Andy Foster, but I thought he introduced some other misconceptions. He was breaking, while he was displacing the misconceptions, while he was addressing them, I thought he introduced some other ones. For why he really wanted to come on the show, okay, it's possible that he's telling the truth, sure, but you can't help but think, if I want to put on my tinfoil hat, if I want to put on my conspiracy hat, if I want to put on my Zach Arnold, MMA draw, Nate Wilcox hat, because those guys are, they will revel in their conspiracies. If I had to do all that about the politics of this, there's two guesses I would have to make. One is the first that Foster was somewhat caught off guard on the hostility directed towards him and the commission. And so he's out here perhaps trying to assuage the public, trying to put a PR spin on it to get rid of some of that hostility, to lower the temperature directed towards them. That's one possibility. The other possibility, too, is that if he is working with others to get this bill passed, and by pass, we mean pass through Congress. It's got to go through the House of Representatives and the Senate, and it's been introduced only in the House. Well, this could possibly suggest that if they're running a PR push still, that maybe they're not 100% confident that it's going to get through, that there might be pushback, let's say, on the legislation. Now, we haven't seen any evidence of that, and we're going to talk about later. I'm sure we're going to talk about a bunch of times in the next couple of weeks about how the fact that boxing industry itself is not doing much to push back. But it is possible that one of the reasons he came on the show is to do a PR swing because perhaps they're concerned that they are not getting the momentum they were hoping for this bill.
Kind of seems like he's carrying TKO's water, though, doesn't it?
I mean, from the outside looking in, it does. I mean, he claims that he's doing this because he has his own opinion on the bill. But, again, you can't help but be suspicious of everybody involved.
One of the reasons he said that this bill is good and important is that it addresses 4, 6, and 8 round boxers. In what way does it address them? And do you think that this is a legitimate reason?
Well, it does address the lower round boxers. When we say 4, 6, 8, if you're an MMA fan listening, not familiar to boxing, the way boxing works is that 12 round fights are now title fights. They used to be higher in the past, 15 rounds, but now 12 rounds is the maximum. That's a title fight. And 10 round fights are the bouts you generally have to compete in according to sanctioning organizations' rules. You have to compete in one 10-round bout before you can take part in a 12-round title fight. So those are the types of rounds for challengers, potentially challengers to 12-round title fights. So that's the top boxers fight of those. So 4, 6, and 8 are the progression levels for beginning boxers. 4, slightly more experienced at 6, and then middle of the career, I don't want to say journeyman, but middle of the career heading towards contender status at 8 rounds. So those are the lower, more beginning boxers, lower ranked, less paid. And so does this bill address them? Yes, it does, because people might not, again, be aware that the original Muhammad Ali Boxing Reform Act was specifically designed, for the most part, to target the top level boxers. And we've talked about this on the show a lot, and you can check out old episodes, and you can check out articles I did about why they would want to amend the Ali Act. But the point of the Ali Act was, in many ways, was to protect boxers. Yes, it's a Bill of Rights for boxers, but it's also an antitrust bill. It's a pro-competition bill. And the way they saw that they could continue more competition as boxing is prevent promoters from monopolizing the top fighters, because as soon as you get the champion, the top guy, you have basically you can get a division on lockdown, because you can demand that everybody who wants to fight that champion, if you don't have protections, they have to sign with you, and it gives you monopoly power over that weight class. And so that's what they're trying to prevent. And so that's why the Ali Act, for the most part, was focused more on those top fighters. This bill, the way it's going to address the lower tiered fighters, is that it's going to set a minimum for purses at what is it, $100 per round, I believe it is,
150
or 150. Sorry, 150 per round. So that's a $600 minimum for a 4-rounder, $900 for a 6-rounder, and $1,200 minimum for an 8-rounder. And so that will address the bare minimum that boxers make nationwide. Now, as you know, it in California, the minimum per purse is even higher than that for boxing. So this would not address or impact anybody in California, the state that Andy Foster works in. The other part of the bill is it expands the medical coverage insurance that promoters have to carry, so the boxers have more insurance coverage when they get injured in the ring only. It's not the UB. We'll talk later about the other portions, but what the UFC offers in training, that's not the part they're talking about. Nationally, it would be just the injuries that you suffer in the ring during the competition that's covered. Both those are great. And are they legitimate? I mean, they're legitimate if you were trying to address the lower ends of the cards. If you're trying in the lower end fighters, if you're targeting them, yes, I would say it's legitimate. What makes me question that, though, is there were other portions of the bill that was attached. And one of these portions is something called a Unified Boxing Organization, a UBO, that a promoter could choose to be a UBO, which would let them also operate as a sanctioning organization. And perhaps most importantly, would let them ignore the other provisions in the Ali Act. So they are interesting these portions into the Ali Act that will protect the 4, 6, and 8 round boxers. Great. That's we should all compliment them on that and say we support that. but they're doing it by eliminating the protections for the top boxers that were granted by the Ali Act. That's the part I don't think is legitimate. And if you look at the fact that fighters that make as low as they're talking about here, $600 per fight, when you look at all the disclosed payouts that we have from the state commissions, we don't have much anymore, but going back in the past, that's less than 5% of all boxers' reported payouts that I've ever seen have made more than or less than $600 in a fight. So you're talking about targeting a very small percentage of the very bottom of boxers to give them this enhanced, increased minimum and extra insurance. And you seem to be willing to sacrifice the top of the card, the highest ranked fighters, the highest paid guys, the protections they currently enjoy, that also coincide with the protections that supposedly prevent monopolization in boxing. So, again, you might like these additions, but I look at them, they seem very much like a Trojan horse that they were put there to make the bill look appealing. So they had talking points, but to smuggle in these other portions that I think are very detrimental.
Seems kind of like window dressing. They would put all the clothes that are on sale in the window, and it sort of masked all the high prices that were inside. This kind of seems like that. You said Trojan horse. This is window dressing for sure. Now, Foster heavily criticized the sanctioning organizations. What was his criticism, and do you agree with him?
Yes, it's hard not to agree with him on this part. On the sanctioning organizations, he was complaining about how there's too many belts, too many titles. The ratings are kind of all over the map. The sanctioning fees are too much what they charge the boxers, too much what they charge the promoters. I don't disagree with any of that. I mean, for years now, I've been talking about the major problem with boxing. In fact, almost the only problem with boxing is the sanctioning organizations. And so I can't help but agree with him when he talks about that the sanctioning organizations are a major problem. The problem I have is this new Muhammad Ali American Boxing Revival Act that they want to pass, that he supports, that the California State Athletic Commission voted 6-0 to support. My problem is that the bill doesn't really address the sanctioning organizations at all. It does nothing really to fix the problem with them. It offers this alternative system that eliminates them, but that creates a whole nest of problems on its own. All these other additional problems that I'm sure, again, we'll be talking about soon enough. But it doesn't address the problems he talked about with the sanctioning organizations. And I can sound like a broken record, but I'll again point out that those problems with the sanctioning organizations were known to the people that passed the Ali Act, that John McCain and his allies held hearings in the Senate, had congressional reports written up, and suggested a bunch of other possible fixes to improve the Ali Act, which they knew was not working the way they'd hoped. And all of them addressed things like these sanctioning organizations and the way they operated. And yet that is not what people are supporting. What they are supporting is not addressing the problems that with the Ali Act. What they're supporting is a bill that carves out a loophole so that one company, TKO, can operate a specific model they want to bring to boxing. That I think that specific model has the threat of potentially leading to monopolization.
Foster repeated the talking point that the bill doesn't change the Ali Act, but instead offers alternatives that give the boxers the option of choosing a model they want. What is your view of this argument?
Well, obviously, I disagree with it, right? It feels like a canard. I've said this before. It's a canard. If in some ways you look at it this way, if you gave someone a chance to work at a company and you said the employer, the boss of the company, the boss of the company had the option, could they follow the Fair Labor and Standards Act, or the federal or the National Labor Relations Act, those two bills, those are the bills that were passed to protect workers and set all kinds of standards for workers and protections. A company, let's say a business had a place, an option, a boss that he could either follow those laws or not. Would you say the worker is being given a choice, an option to either go to a place that follows those laws or not? I would disagree with that framing because, as we know, workers choose out of their immediate needs, out of what's being offered to them. There's plenty of frictions in the workforce and the marketplace that prevent them from taking other jobs, and so people might choose to work with a boss if given the option that does not have to follow federal law, because that place might be closer to where they live, because that job might offer more money right now. But further down the line, after they took in the employment, they might look back and say, wow, I wish I had those protections because this has really come to bite me in the ass. In some ways, I look at this option in the same way. Yes, you're giving fighters an option, but what good is that option if in the immediate it's beneficial to choose this new entity, the Unified Boxing Organization, but later down the line, it ends up that it traps them and limits their pay and has all these other problems attached to it. So I wouldn't consider that truly an option. And that's my problem with this bill, because Foster supports it, and the talking point is it's just an alternative that you can choose the current system of the sanctioning organizations, work with the current 4 alphabet sanctioning organizations and all the promoters, or you can sign up to work with the UBO, where they operate basically on an MMA UFC model where they control rank and title, but they also do not have to follow the other protections of the Ali Act. So you would go to this UBO. Maybe this UBO offers you the higher pay. Maybe this UBO offers you an opportunity you didn't have. Maybe you're desperate for money, and so you decide, I need the work. I'll go to this UBO, whatever reason. But as soon as you're there, that UBO no longer has to disclose compensation like the Ali Act does. So you might be at a disadvantage in negotiations. That UBO is no longer has a protection against coercive contracts. And so they could use coercive contract provisions to basically trap you. If you read the antitrust case, the complaints of the UFC case, it talks multiple times of how the UFC used coercive methods to basically trap people into longer term contracts with the UFC, so they'd be free to do that for boxing. And on top of that, you would also lose the protection against the firewall between sanctioned organization and promoter, between that's conflict of interest protection, or the firewall between promoter and manager. Although they do have some protection still in the UBO against that, it's a little vague. But it does keep some separation between promoter and sanction and manager. But you would also lose the right to private action, where you could just go to a federal court and sue on behalf under an Ali Act provision, right? And so you lose all these tools. And so I look at that and I go, why? Again, if he thinks his bill is good, Foster, if he likes the stuff for the lower round guys, and he thinks UBOs should be allowed, okay, that's fine. You want to have UBOs, but why eliminate all the other protections? Why did those have to be eliminated? That's the part I'm really mystified about. I mean, my concern about the UBOs is that it allows for all the practices that in the litigation or the legislative history of the Ali Act, they describe as methods to gain monopolization over a weight class, that these are the same methods that are described in the UFC antitrust case, the same methods that were described in the U.S. versus International Boxing Club of New York antitrust case, that allows for them. So my concern is the potential for monopolization of the sport. But the other concern is, why eliminate the other Ali Act protections? Why must they be thrown out as well? So you combine those, and I do not believe that it's really offers you an alternative. What I believe it is yes, it offers an alternative, an option for fighters, but one where they might find themselves trapped, and then under the process of, as we know how boxing or MMA and combat sports works, if you manage to ensnare the top fighters, the other fighters down the line may no longer have the option and might be forced or compelled to choose the UBO method.
I want to go off script here for just a second and ask you a separate question, because it seems like they all got together with their talking points from last week to this week, because Foster sort of took the same tack that Big John McCarthy did, and he insinuated two things. He kept repeating that a lot of people out there were misinformed. He used the word hostility, but he kept saying misinformed. And he also insinuated that the people that were hostile to this bill proposal were being intentionally so, like intentionally misleading. What do you think of that?
Well, I think they all have talking points. Someone wrote up the talking points that they want to stress, and they are, because you've seen it time and time again. You've seen Nick Khan say it, Dana White bring them up. Now, Andy Foster, Big John McCarthy, just multiple people. The members of Congress, when they introduced it, brought up these talking points. The whole idea that it doesn't the talking points are, it doesn't change the Ollie Act at all. It just introduces an alternative system that's an option for boxers, which is very misleading, because yes, it leaves all the words of the Ollie Act in place, but it sets up a model where this new entity no longer has to follow the protections of the Ollie Act, can ignore them. So that would say that changes the Ollie Act. It does not leave the Ollie Act in place. And again, as we pointed out, that option might be true for some fighters, but down the line, if you ensnare the top fighters, if you ensnare the ones that kind of matter in the sport, that draw fans and are recognized as the champions, then unless you want to be viewed as being in the minor leagues, and no one watches the minor leagues compared to the major leagues, you'll then have to migrate to the place where all the top fighters are. And that's just the way sports works. And they know that. So those talking points must have been handed out to everybody, because everybody keeps bringing them up, as well as the pointing out that it's a pay increase for the bottom guys and how great that is. But as for the hostility, I haven't heard many other people except for Big John bring up the fact that the people that are not supporting this bill are doing it purely for monetary reasons, that they have financial interest to oppose it, which is absurd, because if you look at who the people were opposing the bill on the phone call, it was MMA fighters, MMAFA members, other fighters from the MMA who are retired, no longer fighting. There's no financial interest for them. None of them are going to make a dime off this bill. None of them are going to make a dime off the bill failing. None of them are going to make a dime off boxing. They just had an interest in seeing the Ollie Act expanded to MMA. And so the idea that they have a financial interest is absolutely absurd. Again, because a lot of these are retired fighters that already collected their paycheck from the UFC settlement. There's no financial interest at all involved there. And so I don't know why exactly Big John would say that. We could say that Big John has a financial interest, because Big John is going to get back into refereeing. He wants to make sure big events come to California so they can give him jobs and he can get the paychecks at working these events, that he's no longer doing the Weigh In podcast. So we could imagine that perhaps Big John McCarthy has some financial interest in getting this bill passed. But the reverse, I don't think, is true. I did not see, the other people have not been that blatant haven't said that blatant of accusations against the opponents. What I mean is that Foster sort of
painted the people that were against this as being hostile and intentionally, deliberately misleading, like we were trying to oppose them for no good reason. Or it also seemed like he kept beating the drum of misinformed, like maybe people that are against this are dumb.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good talking point to have. That if that's the message you're trying to put across, to cast your opponents as ill-informed or misinformed or malicious or whatever, is a good strategy, because then you can ignore what they have to say. Now, opposite is true as well. You see people on Twitter. I try not to. I can't help it at times, but I try not to say that the people supporting this bill are lying. But I think when you look at the evidence, when you weigh what the bill does, what the carve out it has, how it has specific exceptions and specific rules for UBOs that seem specifically designed to benefit one company, you can't help but wonder, the nature of that bill. And when I look at it, I look at what it's trying to remove from the OLLI Act, which again is not perfect. We've had on Pat English, we've had on Kurt Emhoff, we've had on multiple people to talk about the problems that the OLLI Act has, that it's not perfect. It's not enforced enough. The federal government never enforces it. Only the right of private action works, and even then has some imperfections. But it does do something, according to people that work in boxing, according to people that are attorneys and managers in boxing and have used it. The OLLI Act does something. And it seems like reading this, they really are trying to remove the protection of the OLLI Act and set up a system that resembles what brought about the OLLI Act in the first place, what brought about the IBC of New York case, and what brought about the UFC antitrust case. So take that what you will.
Foster also said that the promoters and sanctioning organizations won't be impacted by the bill. Do you believe that?
I mean, in a technicality, yes, they won't be impacted by the bill because if they choose to use the alternative method, the bill won't apply to them. But that, again, that doesn't hold up to scrutiny because, if you look at the nature of the bill, what is the bill supposed to address? Well, all the fans are saying, well, there's too many titles in boxing. We want to have one title. We want to have the best fight in the best. We want to have, basically we want a UFC model in boxing. Well, the only way you get that, the only way it does that and doesn't do the opposite, which is introduce two more titles, introduce less competition and less co-promotion. So the big fights still are never made. The only way it does the opposite, that it brings about a more UFC model, is if it succeeds to monopolize the sport. If it gives a tremendous advantage to TKO, which I think it does in many ways, it gives an advantage to TKO that the others do not have. And in that case, if TKO is given an advantage and there's Zuffa Boxing is given an advantage, and also ring boxing that Turkey owns as partners with them, then that's definitely going to impact the other promoters and sanctioning organizations, right? So on that, yes, on a technicality, it doesn't specifically do anything to impact the other promotions, but I think you just have to play it out in your head just a little bit, and you'll realize that, yes, this will potentially, and I don't even think potentially, will have major implications for the other promoters and sanctioning organizations.
Helwani brought up that the bill has prevented monopolization. Did Foster wave this off too easily?
I was really happy that Helwani brought this up. That this is something I think a lot of people ignore. And I got to say, that was a really good interview by Helwani. He brought up a lot of the stuff. I was nervous he wouldn't bring up a lot of the questions. So he got Foster to answer a lot of the stuff I was asking myself. A handful of stuff may be missing, but overall, very, very good interview. And this was particularly, I liked the fact that the bill, again, the OLLI Act is a pro-competition bill. Competition law is a synonym for antitrust law. It says, when you read the regulatory history, the legislative history, I should say, not the legislative history of the OLLI Act, it talks specifically about how certain actions, behaviors by promoters led to monopolization of those weight classes underneath the champion that they managed to seize and control. And this bill addressed that. Bill also, you go all the way back, you can see that it was addressing problems that existed not just with Don King and Bob Arum boxing, all the way back again to the International Boxing Club of New York, a monopoly case that took place. So the bill, the OLLI Act, but besides offering certain protections to boxers, besides this firewall between managers and promoters that was obviously intended to go after Don King, It had other provisions that the purpose was to prevent monopolization over boxing, which Don King again was the major target of that. But there's a history of other people doing that as well. And I thought Foster did wave this off too easily because he said it will not impact the other promotions. Well, if this gives an advantage to Zuffa Boxing and Ring Magazine Boxing, let's not separate them. They seem to be having a plan to work together, right? There's some sort of relationship because Turkey is working with and the Saudis have invested in the Zuffa Boxing, and also Dana White has said that the only title they'll recognize besides their own is the Ring Magazine title, and that they have carve-outs in their contracts that if fighters become champions, they can be put to fight the Ring Magazine champion, or they can be allowed to fight on Ring Magazine events. So there's obviously it's more than just another two entities. I think we should view them as one promotion, one entity, I guess. Not whatever league thing they're trying to do here, they're working together. So Foster waved off that this is going to do anything, but if there's an advantage granted to TKO, who has vast amounts of money with the Saudis, who has vast amount of influence, and can use the monopoly power of the UFC, WWE, their connections to various media platforms, stars, all these other things with the Saudi money. I mean, there's a term called monopolistic leverage, where you use monopoly power in one entity to help you in another one. And I think that's what we're kind of seeing here, is that we're seeing that monopolistic leverage because I think that's the reason so many people are moving behind TKO to get this bill passed. So if they take advantage of those monopolistic leverage and that gives Zuffa Boxing an advantage over everybody else, then guess what? We might be in a situation where a monopoly may be happening in boxing, or a near monopoly. And so Andy Foster waving that off, I'm like, I think you're waving that off too soon, considering what we've seen with TKO and considering what they seem to be intent on doing in boxing. Because we talked about that investor stock analysis last week about TKO stock. One of the reasons they think it should be a buy, that it should go from $188 a share to $285, that the market cap of the company should go from $38 billion to like $50+ billion, is because they foresee huge amounts of revenue coming in through boxing. And that is something that's been hinted at by Mark Shapiro and others in the organization, that they are looking at doing big things in boxing, and the way to do big things in boxing and keep their margins, their earnings margins super high as well, you have to have some market power in that industry. And I think that is their goal.
Foster said he supported the UBOs having their own titles and ratings. Why do you disagree with this?
Well, we've hinted at it before, but let me explain it very, very clearly. I mentioned the International Boxing Club of New York case. How the International Boxing Club of New York got a monopoly was they signed Joe Louis, got his title, and had a tournament where 4 boxers fought for the heavyweight crown. They did this in actually multiple weight classes. And so the fight for the title, the heavyweight title, you had to sign a contract with them, an exclusive contract that would last 3 to 5 years. And if you won the title, there'd be options that extend that contract. And so they had basically the champion and the top 4 contenders in multiple weight classes. And so they controlled championship boxing in boxing because all those people were recognized as the best. And championship boxing, as they did analysis back then, and we've done analysis on boxing recently, those events generate more revenue. So control over those gave you more revenue than everybody else. At the same time, if you're a boxer and you want to rise the ranks and potentially become the champion, because that's your dream, to be the champion. 2, you'll make more because you'll be more valuable as the champion. Guess where you had to sign now? With the IBC of New York. And that's how why they found out they had a monopoly and why they broke them up. And a similar situation started happening in the 80s and 90s. with Bob Arum and Don King, where they were using options and a course of contracts because they had the champion. If you wanted to fight the champion, you had to sign a contract with them that would give them options so they would control your career after if you won the title, so that no matter what, they came out the winner. And again, same process, same thing started to happen that we saw at the IBC of New York. And they controlled the weight class. And the same thing, lo and behold, is exactly what people have argued that the UFC has done. That the UFC, because they've merged with Pride, because they acquired Strikeforce, because they got the best fighters in the world, the public only recognizes the UFC champions as the best. And so if you want to be recognized as the best and not recognized as fighting in a minor league promotion like PFL, no matter how good their fighters are, and minor league promotions, there's a lot of evidence of this. Minor league promotions do not do nearly as well as major leagues. There's not nearly the interest. Then you're going to have to sign with the UFC. So the UBOs having their own titles and ratings, at first, it might not be a big deal. But if these UBOs can acquire the fighters that the public recognizes as the top people in the world, well, then what happens is that the only fighters that are going to meet them are people signing the UBOs. And so the only people the public are going to recognize as top fighters are those fighters that beat them and are rated by that UBO. And so the UBO will have control over a fighter's position in the sport, their ranking. They'll have power over their ascension because you will not be able to rise to the ranks and be recognized by the public for doing so unless you fight in that UBO. And the only way you become champion is agreeing to the UBO's terms. So that's the reason I disagree, because I think there's been a lot of evidence over the years in boxing that control over rank and title by a promoter, that leads to a form of market power in the industry. It gives them much more leverage over the boxers, potentially monopoly power over that weight class. And I would prefer not to have that. That's not to say that the sanctioning organizations aren't horseshit and they should be addressed. I would be all for Foster if he was doing something to address the sanctioning organizations. But the fact that he's going to address it by eliminating the sanctioning organizations and then handing the power to a UBO, which is really just a promoter, I have to disagree strongly with that.
Foster said that boxing is the only sport that has its own separate rating organizations. Do you know if this is true? And what is the problem that he has with this?
Well, I don't know if is it true? I don't know what his actual argument is here. That they because college football for years has had separate rankings. Now they have the BCS bowl system. But even that's separate rankings. They use a computer. They use the voting by the AP coaches poll. And so all college sports, college football, college basketball, they have a separate ranking system that's not controlled by the air quotes, the league. It has some input by the NCAA, but that's, not a league per se. That's just a governing body. Same with, the tours of golf and tennis. It's not like Wimbledon has its own rankings. And then to go into Wimbledon, they get to choose your ranking. No, it's part of the tour. So I'm a little confused by that, because I agree with Helwani. Boxing might have these independent rankings, but really MMA is the one sport, not really the one, also NASCAR and F1. Basically, the sports where the rankings are controlled by the organization are the sports where the company owns the entire sport. Matchroom has its snooker and darts. They own them, as they brag and they say they're more lucrative than boxing. Imagine why. NASCAR controls their type of racing, as you've explained to me time and time again. Same with F1. And UFC controls the UFC. And so in many ways, they're all self-contained entities, unlike the other sports where either there's a ranking system that's being voted on and accepted outside the league, again, the AP polls in college, or that there's the system is determined as leagues are supposed to be determined by wins and losses in a schedule. NFL sets up a schedule and you get points when you win, and you get a certain number, you make it into the playoffs, the teams with the most wins. So it's a set system that's dependent solely on your performance, instead of based on some arbitrary decision on where you're ranked and if that determines you get a chance or not. So I'm a little like someone will have to explain to me what his reasoning on this is, because I could not follow.
Foster claimed it was a fairy tale or a fable that boxers get paid more. Do you agree with him?
Well, I mean, obviously, in the past, no. I've written an article. I had an article on Uncrowned a couple of weeks ago, talked about how historically boxers make more than MMA fighters. And I say historically, I mean up until like a few months ago. So through time, the last couple of decades, through all the evidence we have from the antitrust lawsuit, for everything I've done, it seems apparent to me boxers make more. Now, I'm going to have a caveat on this, and the caveat I've said several times is I don't know what the boxing market's like in the last 18 months. I can't imagine boxing as a lump sum makes less than MMA, because you look at how much Canelo and Crawford made. You look at how much Gervonta Davis and Jake Paul are probably going to make. You look at how much, the other big fights of the year that happened this year. You take those events and you add them together, and just a handful of fighters, boxers, make more easily than probably all of UFC, all of PFL. And so you imagine that boxers as a whole make more. But on as you move down, in the past, it was very obvious that large numbers of fighters, not just the handful of stars, large numbers of them were making more than MMA fighters. That MMA's spot where they were making more wasn't even on the rest of the regional scene, was just the premium that UFC fighters got. That if you got into the UFC, that class of fighters at that percentile made more than boxers. But when you got up into the top half of the UFC, the top third, boxers just overtook them. Now, the problem I have with that now is in the last 18 months, we've seen the revenue for boxing dry up. Now, we know select boxers like Haney, like Gervonta Davis, Shakur. We know just on public negotiating, they still make millions of dollars. Boots Ennis, comparable to MMA fighters, the same level, they are probably making a lot more. But how many of those how much of that is dried up? How many fewer boxers are in that class than there were just over 2 years ago? There's only so many boxers the Saudis are going to keep afloat, and even then their purses are dwindling. So because the revenue has dried up, because Showtime exited boxing, and PBC moved to an Amazon deal that does not give them any dates, that Top Rank lost their ESPN deal, that a bunch of these promotions have moved to DAZN, who seem to be scaling back how much they're spending, that it is possible, and I don't know if it's true. Again, we go to the past, anytime from a couple of years ago back, boxers definitely made more, but it's possible within the last 12 months or so that MMA, UFC MMA in the United States, will say, has surpassed boxing. That seems possible, but I have no evidence. And one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to reach out to Andy Foster in California, because he brought up that he's seen the evidence just on reported pay. And I'm going to ask him for all the purse information for all the events that have been held in California. And that way we can make a direct comparison between, and also ask how many, amateur MMA and pro MMA bouts versus amateur and pro boxing events. Because one thing we've seen that happen in MMA, boxing has an amateur system that is really from the roots up. It's an Olympic. It's to get you in the Olympics, the amateur system for boxing, where a lot of promoters seem to be taking advantage of the amateur system in MMA. So it'd be interesting to know how much the amateur system has grown in MMA, and also do a direct comparison and see if that's true. Do MMA fighters in California, based on what he said, make less than boxers? And hopefully within a week or so, I will have an answer to that.
Do you believe Foster for the reason that he gave for why the date of their CSAC meeting was moved? And what was that reason?
Well, the reason he gave was that meetings are always changed, right? And that's probably true. Meetings are constantly changed. So it's very possible that just for whatever reason, the other date was not going to work, and they had an opening and they did this meeting. The problem I have with this answer is not that it couldn't be true, but the alternative answer seems very plausible. And the alternative is that there is a planned hearing. We don't know the exact date. We do know that Tom Brown wrote a letter scheduled, dated November 5th, for the Education and Workforce Committee that oversees the OLLI Act. So we imagine that they're planning a hearing on this, and that's the word other people have said as well, that there's an upcoming hearing they're planning for this bill, barring whatever the hell nonsense is happening with the shutdown and the Epstein files and all that stuff. But that they're planning this, and that the reason you kind of imagine that the California State Athletic Commission was so intent of having this vote is because they want to go into that hearing with the message that California State Athletic Commission supports the bill, along with the ABC. Because in some ways, like, why is it important even for the California State Athletic Commission to vote to support this bill? Why are they voting to not only support it, but to have the governor go in and support it and offer support to make sure Congress passes it? Because, it's in their interest, apparently, to help TKO pass this bill. That's the explanation that comes to me. And that explanation makes more sense to me, that they wanted to make sure the bill was passed, or not the bill, but the vote in support of the bill was passed, so they can go into this potential hearing with California behind it. That makes more sense to me than the fact that they announced that they're going to come back in December and then very quickly decided to come back in October, which makes sure that they get the votes in time to present that at any hearing for the bill.
Now, Ariel asked Andy Foster if he might replace Ratner in the future, Mark Ratner, suggesting that maybe the reason he supports it is that he might replace Mark Ratner. Foster kind of shot this down, but he didn't really answer it fully. Do you believe what he did say, and why do you think he's supporting the bill?
I mean, I can only take him at his word. He said he has never talked to anybody about it, and maybe he wants to replace Ratner, and no one's offered it to him, but I mean, it's conceivable, and that's been the rumor for a while, that he will replace Ratner, and that would explain his support. But I think there's another reason just as likely of why he's supporting this bill. And so we can, let's just, true or not, let's just ignore is Ratner going to get replaced by Foster in the future? I think the just as likely reason, in fact, perhaps more likely, although the payoff on the other option is that he does get to replace Ratner, which is probably a good deal. But this prime reason I think he supports the bill is something that Luke Thomas brought up, and something we mentioned, is that currently the UFC is basically the only major MMA promotion, right, that's doing events. There's PFL, but they're doing a handful of events. They're not nearly as big. They don't do. Look at the gate numbers for PFL. They're not very large. Having a PFL event come to your city is not a very big deal. The TV revenue they get is probably not nearly as close as a UFC event. And remember, those are taxed. So the revenue a state is going to make off a PFL event is just microscopic compared to what they can make off a UFC event. And that's different from, Bellator a few years ago, because Bellator, one thing they did do is they didn't sell like the UFC, but they sold tickets. They had live gates. And so having a Bellator event was healthy for the state commission. So now you're looking at California. There is no one in MMA putting on A-list type events that can come to California. Maybe PFL slightly, but again, not really. But the only one is the UFC. They have, we've said, they have a monopoly or a near monopoly over the market. And so they're the only ones going to bring these events they can tax. Then you throw in the fact that pro wrestling is the other source of revenue for a lot of states. And the WWE is the very dominant figure in that. Other promotions, I guess AEW is fairly big, but still not as big. And WWE is the only other one, and they're not doing nearly as many live events as they used to. And so that money's drying up. And they're, again, controlled by the same company. So TKO controls UFC events, WWE events. So the only other form of revenue, of major source of revenue for these commissions, would be boxing. And as he pointed out, boxing has dried up on networks. It's lost 4 major TV deals. And again, TV is taxed up to a $50,000 max, I think, in California. So, but that TV revenue is gone for those events if they're held in California, if they have no TV license fees. And also they're not holding nearly as many events. And so you look at the boxing landscape and you think, well, we've down to a bare minimum MMA. We're dependent on the UFC. We're down to a bare minimum of pro wrestling. We're dependent on the WWE, the same company. And now, lo and behold, TKO is going to get into boxing with Zuffa Boxing. If we want to stay alive, if we want to collect the fees necessary to keep our commission going, if we want to get the type of jobs where we can assign people to be investigators, judges, referees at these events, we need to make sure TKO is willing to bring events here. And TKO has the leverage to say, well, unless this bill passes, we might not go to California. And so I think that's a strong motivation he would have, is that to make sure events that TKO controls come to California. That's probably the reason why the California State Athletic Commission seems so gung-ho on supporting this. And this is a prime example of that term I used a little while ago, monopolistic leverage. You're using the leverage you have with your other monopolies to gain a monopoly in another sport or gain market power. In this case, you're using the leverage that you have over the commissions, which goes to our other favorite term, regulatory capture. You're using that leverage to say, well, we are not bringing our events unless you help us on our Zuffa Boxing enterprise. And I think to me, that's the best and most likely explanation of what's going on right now. The other stuff is possible, but I think, Occam's razor, you look at it and go, that to me seems like that is clearly what seems to be happening with the California State Athletic Commission right now.
Final question. Which questions did Ariel not ask that you wish that he did?
Oh, that's a good one. That is a good one. There's two questions. One for sure is he brought up the MMA fighters, why they would want the Ali Act to be left the way it is, because they eventually wanted expanded MMA. But what he didn't ask of Radner, even though he did bring up the antitrust lawsuit, and I wish he kind of asked of not Radner, Foster.
Yeah.
Apologies. What he didn't bring up of, I've already have him replacing Radner on my head. No, but what he didn't bring up to Foster, and I kind of wish he had brought this up, is how does he feel comfortable with the fact that this bill could impact the litigation that's currently going against the UFC? As we've talked about, the Phil Davis v. Zuffa case cites the legislative history of the Ali Act and the Ali Act history, because it cites them as examples what leads to monopolization. And so they use that example saying, listen, we can't have these same practices that are outlawed in boxing and MMA because it leads to monopolization. Please give us injunctive relief. Well, if you change the bill, that what you're citing actually says, oh, this is purely legal. I mean, this is not purely, this is legal behavior by a promoter to do this in boxing. Well, it kind of loses a lot of its power, right? So my question to Foster was, do you feel comfortable supporting a bill that could possibly greatly impact the litigation that these fighters have against the UFC? I wish that, in fact, that was the one I wish was asked. I can't blame anybody because no one thinks of that question, probably of me, but that's one I wish was asked.
Well, all right. There you have it, folks. Our response to the Andy Foster interview. Do me a favor, follow John on all of his social media. He's Hey Not the Face on Twitter, Blue Sky, and YouTube. And on Threads, he is Hey Not the Face Podcast. You can follow me on Twitter, Crooklyn MMA, on Blue Sky, just plain old Crooklyn. And if you're on Instagram and Threads, you can find me at Crooklyn949. If you have questions, comments, suggestions, or information, please send them our way. We will do our very best to feature them on a future episode. From here, y'all know the drill. Until next time, please stay safe and subscribe.
Ow! Ow! Not the face! Ooh! Okay, the face!